Everyone, I'm going to do the video a little differently today. I'm actually going to do what I started doing with US history, and instead of me having a PowerPoint and just going over the PowerPoint real quick, I'm going to talk to you more conversationally about the topic because it's what's in your book anyways, so you can read along in your book as I go over this, so just follow along if seeing the words written are helpful. And I'm going to put a poll up that you guys can put whether or not you like this format better. So we're going to be going over today the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the part that has to do with Germany, which actually is the vast majority of the Treaty of Versailles. Anyways, the other treaties at the Paris Peace Conference weren't actually all part of the Treaty of Versailles, even though they all kind of get umbrellaed in there with it. But there's multiple treaties that actually came out of the Paris Peace Conference, but we're going to be focusing today on how that impacted Germany. So at the end of the war, Germany is actually expecting that they're not going to get hit that hard by the peace settlement because they were expecting the 14 points to be followed. You should remember that from Unit 1. Woodrow Wilson proposed all these plans to try to prevent a future war from occurring, and they would have been pretty kind to Germany. So Germany was all about thinking they're going to be their peace agreement is going to be the 14 points. In fact, a lot of their anti-war movement and what encouraged them to stop fighting, politically speaking, that encouraged the government to stop the war, was the 14 points. And they thought that they would be getting treated under the 14 points because everybody knew about them. But you see, Germany wasn't expecting, when the actual peace settlement came out and they were presented with it, that they would be getting the Treaty of Versailles, which was a lot harsher. So it really upset the Germans. So remember from your reading yesterday that Germany was not allowed to actually go to the Paris Peace Conference. They weren't invited. They were just told, we're going to put the peace plan together and you're going to have to sign it. And the fact of the matter was, Germany was kind of in a position where they had to sign it. When they agreed to the armistice, they pulled their troops out of France and back into Germany. They also had their own little uprising where they got rid of their monarchy and started putting forth their democratic government known as the Weimar Republic. So Germany is not in a situation at all to declare war because they would be invaded this time instead of continuing fighting where they were. So Germany is not in a position to really fight this. As a result, the German representatives have to sign off on the Treaty of Versailles. And it was harsh to Germany. So I have a little acronym for you. And we're going to go over all of this at some point. Probably not in order. Actually, we're not going to go over it in order. But the Treaty of Versailles, as far as Germany goes, was a brat. It was a brat to Germany. So we're going to go over how the blame, reparations, arms, and territory. We're going to go over all of those, and we're actually going to go over them almost backwards. But so if you remember Treaty of Versailles, the terms of it, remember brat, you should be able to remember what all went into it. So we'll go over each part of brat. We're actually going to start with territory, though. So Germany, at the end of the war and when signing the Treaty of Versailles, had to give up 27,000 square miles of territory. And we'll go over all the bits of territory that they lost. In addition, 7 million Germans were now no longer German. They lost their country, being that they lived in an area that was carved up and either given to one of the enemies of Germany in World War I or one of the brand new countries that was developed as a result of World War I. So let's look at this real quick. This is just some of them to start out. First up, we have Alsace and Lorraine. This was territory that Germany gained through the Franco-Prussian War. So you know France was all about getting this land back because we've already gone over how bitter they were about losing that war. So Alsace and Lorraine region goes back to France. Eupen and Malmedy, which I'm sure I pronounced those both wrong, they go to Belgium. It was a smaller piece of territory, but it was part of Germany that bordered Belgium. Belgium gets that territory. North Schleswig, which was actually used to be part of Denmark, gets returned to Denmark through the Treaty of Versailles. The Saar Valley, which was one of the really important economic regions of Germany, it was their mining area, that Germany loses. Kind of. That gets under the administration of the League of Nations. So if you see LON, that's League of Nations. League of Nations is going to take over it for 15 years. Now, at the end of that 15-year period, there's going to be a plebiscite. And what that means is that the people living in the Saar Valley region are going to get to vote whether they want to become part of France or go back to Germany. So, yeah, I'm sure that was going to make Germany very happy that they were going to be losing one of the major parts of their industry. You need iron if you're going to be an industrialized country. So this was a real hit to Germany. Next, the Rhineland had to be demilitarized. The Rhineland is the border area between Germany and France. So basically, Germany was not allowed to have any military here along their border with France at all. But there was nothing restricting France from keeping their military right up on the border with Germany. So this is aimed at making sure that Germany doesn't have the capability of attacking France. So this is that added bit of security that France was really, really looking forward to, that Georges Clemenceau was really pushing for during the Paris Peace Conference. So they get that through demilitarizing a big chunk of the German territory. Next, West Prussia goes to Poland, which is a brand new country at this time. Yes, Poland has existed before, but Poland was not a country as a recognized country until after World War I. So a big chunk of what was Prussia becomes Poland. The issue here, though, is that the entirety of Prussia did not go to Poland. There's still East Prussia. So if you were to look on a map, a post World War I map, you'll see that there is a part of Germany stuck in Poland, of the northern part. So basically, this West Prussia area, what it was intended to do, this is called the Polish Corridor. What it intended to do was to give Poland access to the sea. But what it did, though, is it actually split Germany. So Germany there, you have two parts of the country that aren't connected. So of course, when World War II happens, there's going to be a push to reunite that part of Germany. Next, the port of Memel went to Lithuania, and that goes into the next part, which is Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, were all territories Germany gained from the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which was the treaty that ended the war with Russia. So Germany lost that territory through the Treaty of Versailles, and those territories, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, all become new independent nations. That comes a little bit of an issue for Russia later on, because Russia is at the Paris Peace Conference saying, well, why don't we get our territories back that we gave up to Germany in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk? And the other powers at the Paris Peace Conference pretty much said, you quit on the war, you don't get to go back and get anything that you gave up to Germany. So that was German, now we're taking it. So that becomes a point of contention for Russia as we get into World War II. And then African colonies. Germany's African colonies, they're not getting independence. Come on, Europe's not going to give them independence. Instead, they become basically territories that the League of Nations is going to oversee. So that's what happened to Germany's territories. As you can see, Germany lost a lot of land and a lot of people. And because of that, they also lost a lot of money. A lot of Germany's economic capabilities lay in those territories, especially when they lost the Saar Valley. That was intended to really hit Germany's military capability as well as their economics, because they lacked the ability to keep up their industrialization going. So that really hurt Germany. Also going along with territory, there was this fear that Germany and Austria would unite following the war, because Austria, once it broke off, because the Austria-Hungarian Empire was torn apart, Austria is now an independent nation. So there's this fear, since Austria is culturally pretty German, there's not much difference between Germany and Austria as far as culture goes, and they speak German. So there's this fear that Germany and Austria would unite. And considering they were the two big powers in World War I, there was this really big desire to make sure they did not ever unite. So that gets us part of the Treaty of Versailles outlawed Anschluss, which Anschluss would be the coming together of Germany and Austria as one country. So that also gets outlawed. Now let's move on to the A in BRAT, which is armaments or army, arms. So the German army gets reduced down to 10,000 troops, period. Considering that there were battles in World War I where 1 million people were casualties on each side, that's a very small military. The idea of that size military is Germany won't be able to attack anyone. That is almost like a police force style army. It's enough that Germany can kind of patrol its borders, but if Germany was to be attacked by anybody with that size military, they're not doing anything. The idea, though, is the League of Nations will come in and protect Germany, maybe, if Germany is attacked. So Germany, with only 10,000 troops, no tanks and no air force. German military has been extremely weakened here, and it's opening them up, which becomes a big fear of Germany, to attack. They don't really have the capability of protecting their borders. The idea there is, from the Paris Peace Conference, is they can protect their borders, but they can't attack anybody. But Germany's like, we can't even protect ourselves. France could invade us. So now Germany's going to start getting fears of not being able to protect itself. And Britain gets its part with knocking the armaments of the German military, because they really restrict the Navy. And you should remember, there was one of the big motivating factors for World War I was the naval arms race between Germany and Great Britain. So for the Navy, no submarines for Germany. Britain was very upset about that blockade of Great Britain. And they can only have 6 battleships. So basically the German Navy is non-existent there. So there's that part. And then we're going to add in the B and the R together for blame and reparations, because they actually go together. Blame. Blame is the war guilt clause. Germany had to take the entirety of the blame for World War I. And as we went over with the causes of World War I, yes, Germany played a big role in the outbreak of World War I. They started getting kind of aggressive. You could see whenever they were the issues in North Africa with France, that Germany was getting kind of aggressive, especially towards France and Britain. You had them engage in a naval arms race with Britain. And this is all going in where they become a rival of other European powers, because you had King Kaiser Wilhelm II pushing for that place in the sun. So Germany does play a role in the outbreak of World War I. However, you really can't argue that they are the only country to blame, especially when you see what happened with Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and with all the alliances going on. Germany really can't be blamed entirely for the war. However, the Treaty of Versailles comes up, and Germany has to take all of the blame for the war. All of it. And once again, Germany doesn't really have the option not to sign it. So whenever you take blame for something, what do you have to do if you are to blame for something? If something major happens and it causes a lot of damage, think about it. What would you have to do? Pay for it. And that's next. That's the R. Reparations. Germany was required to pay for all the damage the war caused. And if you see here that date, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. Why on earth do you have October 2010 written down here? Because that's when Germany finished paying off their World War I debt. That just goes to show you how completely insane the costs of that war were for wow, that's not English. How insanely high the cost of the war was, and how much Germany was expected to pay. But as we get through this unit and we talk about how there were attempts to lessen the impact on Germany for this for the reparations, because they wrecked Germany for a while. And then considering, World War II happens and Hitler's not paying the reparations, you can see why it would take a while. But that just goes to show you, with with interest and the sheer amount of money that Germany had to pay, it took them nearly 100 years to pay off their World War I debt. Now, we'll get into tomorrow. You'll be reading about how historians responded to, or respond now, looking back at the Treaty of Versailles. Now, think about this for you, just to start posing these thoughts in your head. Was the Treaty of Versailles fair? Did Germany deserve everything that happened to them through this war? I mean, they lost, but did they deserve to have all that territory taken? Remember that 7 million Germans were displaced, essentially, forced to live in another country, where many of them, if they could, moved back into German territory. But the ones that stayed, they suffered repercussions from being German and being part of the country that lost the war. So they were punished for their government's actions and the military's actions in the war. Was that fair? Now think, if you were a German at this time and all this treaty has been pushed upon you, how would you feel about that as a German? How might that impact your thoughts and your beliefs going forward through the next decade? And how might that, especially now, we will get more into what happens with Germany later on. You can add into that whenever you're considering this. Why, when you think about that, why might Germany shortly, just slightly over a decade later, might find somebody like Hitler who was promising to bring Germany back to its former glory, why might they find somebody like that as an attractive leader for their country? Part of that comes back to the Treaty of Versailles.